Last year during Ravenloft month we took a look at the adventure Howls in the Night and how we would go about adapting it to 5th edition. I thought I would do something similar this year, and I chose to do a quick conversion of the adventure The Created. Now I'm not talking about the Children of the Night The Created, which is an adventure collection of short adventures centered around golems. No, The Created is a wholly different adventure with a confusingly similar name. The adventure takes inspiration from Pinocchio, and if you enjoy the dark and disturbing toys from Blinsky in Curse of Strahd, then this adventure will be right up your alley. The Created takes place in the Ravenloft domain of Odier, which in the campaign guides is described as being a ruined Italian village populated by near feral children and deadly toys. The adventure actually takes place during the fall of Odier, and the players get to experience how the village is pulled into the mists, and have a showdown with its Dark Lord. So let me start with a brief overview of the adventure. The players are in Odier during the Bambine, a spring festival, and are enjoying themselves and taking in the sights. The festivities are interrupted, however, by screams for help as a murder has taken place. Now, once on the scene of the crime, the players will find the local constable quite inept, and he quickly deputizes the player characters to aid him in his investigation. At this point, the players won't really be able to solve the mystery, but they might get some hints at things to come. Mostly, this scene exists to set up a reason to pull the players away to safety during the next scene. After exploring the crime scene, the players most likely find themselves attending a puppet show at the village theatre. This is where they are first introduced to Odier's new Dark Lord, the puppet Maligno and his creator Giuseppe. They are performing the show together. Before long, however, the village constable barges in again and drags the players away to interrogate a potential murder suspect that he has caught. Now, while the players are away, Maligno unleashes a horde of carionettes, deadly animated marionette dolls with the ability to swap their minds into the living. They quickly replace everyone at the theatre, and then they set out to conquer the town to celebrate. And then the players are drawn back to the theatre again after hearing that everyone went missing, and run into Maligno and some of his carionettes again. Although, the Dark Lord grabs his creator and flees. The village has now been thrusted into Ravenloft, and the players are trapped and will need to defeat Maligno to escape. At this point, the adventure gets more open as the players explore the village and try to find Maligno. A series of deadly and humorous and terrifying encounters follow, and the most likely course of action finds the players being drawn into an ambush at the Giuseppe's toy shop. If the players are defeated, their bodies are claimed by carionettes, and they will now need to navigate the city's wood puppets, find out how to steal back their bodies, and then confront themselves. Maligno, meanwhile, has made his way back to the theatre, and the players will need to confront and destroy him there. So, now that we know the rough story, we need to figure out what we need to do to convert it over to 5th edition. Well, for starters, it's a Ravenloft adventure, so we're going to need to use fear and horror rules. Now, as most of you already know, we already have 5th edition rules for those that work well. You can find those in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so each time the adventure calls for fear or horror checks, use those. Now the next big thing we need to address is the carionettes themselves. Now while they haven't been introduced in any of the official D&D books, we actually do have 5th edition stats for them. In the Planeshift Innistrad PDF that was released, we got the Creepy Doll monster. These are basically carionettes, and are already fully fleshed out and balanced for 5th edition. So download the PDF. I'll add a link down below, and go to page 25 to find them. There are two things we need to take into account with the Creepy Doll. Now, first off, we need to reskin one of their abilities. Both the Creepy Doll and the Carionette has the ability to disable targets and swap bodies with them, but in the Creepy Doll's case, it's more of a psychic assault, while the Carionette uses silver needles attached to them by a magical thread of energy. The ranges are pretty similar, and the mechanics are similar enough, but it's important for the adventure that we keep the needles, so when the dolls do their attack, just describe them as throwing or stabbing with needles. The second thing we need to take into account is that the Creepy Doll is built and balanced for combat in a way that the Carionettes were not. Now, this is pretty common with creatures brought in to the newer editions, that they're built with combat encounters in mind, and have less special and instant kill attacks, but do more damage and can be a little tougher. At some points in the adventure, the players will be attacked by as many as 18 carionettes. Now, unless your group is fairly high leveled, this is not going to be an option. Creepy dolls are challenge rating 2, so I suggest simply reducing the number of dolls attacking the players to be more in line with the group. When I thought of this adventure in my head, I imagined that it would be for players around level 4 or 5, and my groups are usually around 4 people, so most fights shouldn't feature more than 3 or 4 carionets if you want the fight to be fair. Of course, you can always convert over the carionets from 2nd edition, and make them more in line with the older incarnations to get the adventure to play out closer to the original. It's extra work, however, and the important thing, I think, is to get the adventure to feel the same. And we don't need to keep the exact number of enemies or their mechanics to do that. Moving forward, I will be assuming that we're using the creepy dolls, so keep that in mind. Now, during the exploration part of the adventure, it is assumed that any player who wanders off alone is captured by the carionets and has his body stolen. I suggest keeping this aspect. Don't use the rules presented with the creepy doll in that case to allow the players an intelligence contest, or such to resist this, as it will give away the later surprise. The town is swarming with carionets, and the player was foolish enough to split away from the party, so even if a character has a very high intelligence, we can assume that one of the many carionets sooner or later managed to overcome them. As for the random encounters themselves, these can mostly play out as written. Just remember to decrease the number of carionets where necessary. The pack of 6 to 12 giant rats is a fairly good amount. It's not going to be much of a challenge, but they aren't really meant to be, so that's fine. When the runaway carriage comes by, you can replace the saving throw versus breath weapon with a dexterity saving throw. Now, this is actually a pretty general rule you can use when converting 2nd edition adventures. If you read up on saving throws versus breath weapons in the older books, you will find that it's often called upon in any situation where you need to try to completely dodge something, which would be a dexterity saving throw these days. You can also keep the damage of 6d6. This is meant to be a deadly amount, after all. The players could have just stepped out of a street and avoided it. Then after the exploration, we have the ambush at the toy shop. Now, there's no way we can throw 18 carionets and Maligno at the players. This fight is supposed to be unfair, but they should still have a slim chance. I would say about half of that to give the players a fighting chance, 10 at the most, unless your group is very large, high-leveled, or have had an exceptionally easy time so far. If the players are defeated, they then wake up in the bodies of the carionets and have to escape. There are rules on the creepy doll on how to handle the abilities and stats for a person in that state, so I suggest we keep to those, having the player keep their intelligence, wisdom and charisma, but using the physical statistics of the doll. We can ignore any special rules around movement and fall damage in the adventure, but we will want to make up some rules to allow the players to repair themselves. We can keep the half hour it takes to make repairs and that the players need to be at 0 HP. Then I see 2 options. Either we let the players roll the creepy doll's hit dice to heal, so that's 6d4 plus 6. This is likely to fully heal the player if they have the standard 21 HP, or bring them up close to full at least. Alternatively, we can let them roll 2d8 plus 2. This won't ever be able to fully heal them, and it's closer to the amount they gain in the original. After all, once broken, their little toy bodies will just never be as good as new. The animated toys that the players encounter during this next part could be handled with the rules taken from the Animate Object spell in 5th edition Player's Handbook. However, I suggest avoiding doing that during this scene, since having them deal 1d4 plus 4 damage and have a plus 8 attack is just a little bit too deadly when the players only have 21 HP and a long way to go to bring back their bodies. Most of the toys should only have a plus 2 or plus 3 to hit at the most, and I suggest letting them do a base damage of 1. Unless they are meant to be especially dangerous, then we can let them do 2 or a d3 damage. A lot of these toys also have special abilities that call upon a breath weapon saving throw. And as we discussed earlier, all of these can be replaced with a dexterity saving throw. As for the rest of the threats the players encounter as puppets, we can just use the stats for cats and giant rats from a monster manual, use jackals for the dogs, and Julio the madman is a commoner. The only thing we have left now to decide before we can run the adventure is how to handle the Final Showdown and the stat Maligno. Now 4 carionets, a toy dragon, and Maligno himself might be too much for some groups. It's going to have to be a judgment call on your part, but I suggest letting the 2 carionets leave with the children if the players are smart enough to wait for the play to end. Alternatively, you can just decide that the 2 of the smaller roles, the Squire and the Jester perhaps, aren't taking part in the play, or that the carionets switch between roles, making their total number less. As for Maligno, for the most part we can use the creepy doll stats for him, but I suggest increasing his charisma to 16. He is tougher than your average Carrionet, so we should start by tripling his HP to 63. You can even go as high as 100 if your players tend to breeze through fights. He is also supposed to be more resistant to magic than the normal Carronets. In 2nd edition, the Carronets were all immune to lightning and cold damage. Full immunity in 5th edition is rare, but I suggest giving him resistance to both of those damage types. The original Maligno would have been immune to almost all magic that affects him directly, so you'll have to use your judgment here if you want him to be affected by other spells cast by your players. Things such as Levitate, for instance. If you want to make him tougher, you can also give him resistance or immunities to psychic damage. And if you want to make him a little bit easier, you can give him a vulnerability to fire damage. Now, fire damage is the only thing that can destroy him, but baseline I would say he doesn't take any extra damage from it, other than the fact that it cuts through all of his many resistances. Now, Maligna has several spell-like abilities, so we need to give him a spell DC. With his increased charisma, this should be around 13. 2 of his spell-like abilities are pretty straightforward. First off, he can cast Otto's Irresistible Dance at will, but he must touch his targets to do so. He can also cast Animate Object at will, but its range is 30 feet and he can only affect toys. Those 2 function otherwise just as they do in the player's handbook. His other 2 spells don't really exist anymore in 5th edition. Taunt is fairly similar to Compel Duel, so we can replace it with that spell at will. Just reflavor it that he uses jeers and insults to cause his targets to attack him and fight him. Ventriloquism, however, doesn't really have a similar enough spell that I can think of, but we can replace that ability with the simple ability to throw his voice at any point within 30 feet, and the players can roll a Wisdom Insight against 13 to determine if the voice is really coming from there or not. And with that, we have converted another classic 2nd edition Ravenloft adventure to 5th edition. I hope you give the created a try. Do let me know if you do, and use any of my advice on how to convert it. I would also highly recommend that you, if you plan on running the adventure, that you give the book Forged of Darkness a look. It deals with magical items in Ravenloft, and features many of Giuseppe's creations. They might make for some interesting rewards for the players if they give his workshop a proper search. And as always, if you enjoyed this conversion, then why not give it a like? And if you subscribe, don't forget to push the bell icon so you receive notifications when I release new content. If you want to support my channel, then please share this video with your friends or on social media. It really helps out a lot. You can also follow me on Tumblr or Twitter, or check out my DM's Guild page. Links to all of that below. Until next time, Dungeon Delvers.